The Season 7 cliffhanger of Outlander isn't the only loose thread that needs tying in Season 8. There are so many storylines that need to be wrapped up, so let's talk about it. As always, this will have spoilers for the books and the show, so if you are looking to avoid those, please do keep on scrolling. Now, we know we're entering into a Game of Thrones situation where Book 10 has not yet been completed, but the show has already been wrapped. So which storylines are they going to need to give us some closure on in Season 8? These are the ones I think they will cover. The first, of course, being the cliffhanger from the season finale, the Faith storyline, which does not play out the same way in the books, so the show is really going to have the liberty of taking this in any direction that they want to. We'll have to find out if Faith actually lived, if she's still alive, if she's somehow tied into the Blood of My Blood prequel series, if Blood of My Blood is only going to be a standalone series, or if they will somehow have multiple seasons, and how they're going to tie in the song that Fanny sings and how she learned it. And to do that, we also need to have some clarification on Master Raymond. Is he going to come back? Is he going to make another appearance? Was he a part of a bigger puppeteering storyline that we're unaware of? This is a big question for book readers as well that hasn't been answered yet, so I'm curious if the show will touch on this. The show will also need to tackle the McKinzies and how quickly they are reunited with Claire and Jamie at Fraser's Ridge at the beginning of the season. In Book 9, Brianna actually becomes pregnant again and gives birth to their third child, a son named Davy. Obviously, 9 months of pregnancy is something that would need to be covered, and it takes them quite a while to actually get to the ridge, so I don't know how condensed of a storyline this will end up being, and if we will see Davy. Davy is also the only child that cannot time travel in the McKinzie family, and I'm curious if they're going to elaborate more on Jemmy and Mandy's powers, specifically Mandy's, as she's one of the most powerful time travelers at this point in the story. When Brianna comes back through the stones with the family, she actually ends up with a heart condition that makes it so that she also cannot travel again, meaning that her and Davy are trapped in the past, which theoretically means that the whole family is. Season 7 also did not provide any closure on Rob Cameron and his men, if any one of them are going to follow Brianna into the past. In the books, we actually have a conversation between Bree and Jamie talking about how he fears that someone might travel back in time after Bree again. So this is something that they also need to wrap up in the show. To that end, they didn't include the Fraser prophecy, and we haven't gotten a resolution on this since Season 3 when it was first brought up. So I'm curious if they're going to wrap that up somehow. And even though it's confirmed that Tobias Menzies will not make an appearance in Season 8, that doesn't mean that they can't loop the Frank storyline, his letter about the Fraser prophecy, and his involvement in Brianna's journeying through the past, his book that he writes that Jamie sees. There's many, many ways that they could bring Frank back into Season 8 and wrap up his storylines as well. There's also a few storylines involving Lord John Grey that will need to be cleared up by the end of Season 8, including whether or not him and Jamie are friends again by the end of the story, if Percy Beauchamp is going to be involved again, and whether or not he is captured like he is in Book 9. We did get some insight into Lord John's storyline in Season 8 through this photograph where he looks a little worse for wear, and I'm hoping that this means we will get this storyline and the involvement of Captain Richardson in his kidnapping, and hopefully tie that into William again and Jamie. Another important component of that storyline is the involvement of Amaranthus Grey, who will be played by Carla Woodcock. And we did get plenty of behind-the-scenes shot of her dressed in costume here and showing up with William, played by Charles Vandervaart. In the books, Amaranthus Grey is the widow of William's cousin Benjamin, who goes missing and is presumed dead in Book 9. William goes looking for him, and along the way, Hal Grey and Lord John receive a letter from Amaranthus claiming that she is the mother of Benjamin's son, Trevor. There are also a lot of moments in Book 9 where it seems like she's trying to secure William's favor, and she comes across as kind of a shady character in the book, so I'm excited to see her portrayal. We'll also be introduced to two new characters, Captain Charles Cunningham and his mother Elspeth. You might recognize Kieran Bew, who will be playing Charles from House of the Dragon. Now, these two characters are introduced in Book 9. They are living on Fraser's Ridge when Jamie and Claire return, and Charles is a retired officer, captain in the British Army, and his mother and him live there but are very much loyalists, and he becomes a threat to Jamie as he sets up a plot to capture him and hand him over to the loyalists. So this will be the drama, I think, for Season 8. which also begs the question of whether or not we will see the return of Jenny Murray in season 8. She has not been in America yet as far as the end of season 7, so I'm curious if they will find a way to bring her over from Scotland so that she can help raise Ian and Rachel's newborn son, which we will hopefully see in season 8 as well. In book 9, we also have the return of Ian's son with his Mohawk wife, so I'm curious if they will go through with that storyline too. And even though we know we will have Rachel show up, I'm curious if we're going to have the return of Denzel Hunter and if he will meet Dottie. Dottie is the sibling of Benjamin Gray, so if we're getting Amaranthus, I'm curious if they're going to have the other Gray siblings show up in season 8 as well. Now, thankfully, we do have confirmation that Fergus and Marsali will be in season 8, but there are two storylines that are very big and important for these two characters that I'm curious if they will cover. The first is the death of their son Henri Christian, which is very tragic and sets off a different path for their oldest son Germain. The second is exploring Fergus's parentage, which involves Percy Beauchamp, something that I really hoped they'd touch upon because it involves the Comte Saint-Germain and would be a nice callback to, again, Master Raymond if they choose to explore that storyline. Marsali also has more children in the books. She ends up having twins, so they could do a lot with them. Now for William, we saw him go through quite an internal conflict in season 7, and season 8 is no different. He could explore a few different storylines from the books. The first is reuniting with his sister Bree, and they spend a good amount of time in book 9 together, and those were some of my favorite scenes from the book. He also obviously is going to see Amaranthus Gray, and that is going to be another subplot they can explore with him trying to find his cousin Ben. But I do hope, and I do think, that they will pay off this line here where he says, "I'll never call you father," with Jamie, and we will see them reunited together again, hopefully at Fraser's Ridge. William does end up asking Jamie for help when he goes to rescue Lord John Grey, so I'm assuming we will get some sort of a moment between them as well where they will go on that adventure together. Now, one of the absolute musts for me is giving us an answer to Jamie's ghost from season 1, episode 1. And I'm curious if this will be something that they rely upon Diana's instruction for, or if they come up with their own version. I personally don't think that Diana would allow them to use the book version of events for the show and spoil the books, but I also know that she's planning on hopefully releasing the book around the same time as season 8, so it's really hard to say if the ending will be the same for both mediums. That said, I think this is one of the biggest payoffs as a fan of the show and of the books that really needs to be answered in season 8, and I hope that they answer it in a way that makes sense and is satisfying. The other overarching theme here is how much of the war are we going to see in season 8? Will we see the Battle of King's Mountain? Will we have a resolution at the end of the show? Will the war be over? Will they still be in the middle of it? Will they have resigned themselves from the war? There is a lot of time between the end of season 7 and the end of book 9 that the show would have to cover and beyond that. So I'm very curious where in history the show will choose to end itself, and if we will ever get an answer as to whether or not Claire and the kids stay in the past, go forward in the future, and if Outlander is a Mobius, will they even touch that? Will they just have these two have a happily ever after, ride off into the sunset, stay in the past? They could take this any number of ways, so I'm very curious which way they choose to go here. I personally can't believe we're getting a season 8 and that the show has the opportunity to wrap up this storyline in the way that they think is appropriate. I think we're lucky that we're going to have 2 different versions of this story and 2 different endings, and hopefully both are satisfying. So let me know, what are you looking forward to the most? What do you hope they include in season 8? Where do you think the story will end? Any of your insights and guesses, leave them in the comments.